Hi everyone, welcome back to another video, and we are continuing our series on vampirism, the science behind the myths, and we are talking about acute intermittent porphyria. And if you remember from last video, porphyria is the inability to synthesize heme, and we get a lot of our vampire myths from these categories of diseases. So you may notice that this is acute intermittent porphyria. It is the second most common type of porphyria in adults, and it's interesting because if it's acute and intermittent, that would mean that they are not symptomatic all the time. And that can be kind of weird because it's an enzyme deficiency or an enzyme mutation where you cannot synthesize heme. So how can you have something acute and intermittent in something that is genetic or inherited? Well, in cases like this, you are not symptomatic all of the time. So you have an adult who does not present with any symptoms, and then an event happens that triggers them to have an attack of porphyria. So under certain conditions, they are not able to produce heme. And so then this can give the illusion of becoming a vampire because you have someone, an adult, who wasn't symptomatic, that is now symptomatic for a period of time, and then might go back to being asymptomatic again, or they might continue to be symptomatic depending on the stresses involved. So we're going to talk about this pathway today, and I thought this was a good one to start off with because we're going to add enzymes of this pathway, and I'm not going to introduce the entire pathway at once because that's a lot of information. So we're going to add enzymes as we talk about the different types of porphyria. So starting off this pathway, we have glycine and succinyl-CoA, which are going to be converted by ALAS or ALA synthase. Sometimes I call it ALAS or ALAS. However you want to pronounce it, that is fine. ALAS is going to convert glycine and succinyl-CoA to aminolevulinic acid or ALA. And the reason why I have this starred and underlined is because this is our rate limiting step. This is probably the most important step of the entire pathway. And what this means is that this is irreversible. So, glycine and succinyl-CoA, once they are converted to ALA, they cannot go back and become glycine and succinyl-CoA again. They are trapped in this pathway. So the only way they can become heme is going forward. You cannot go back. If you have a deficiency in an enzyme, you'll see it does not mean you can go backwards in the pathway. You have to go forward. So it traps the reactants and the products into this pathway, and we're going to see why that is so important. But it also, when I say it's the rate-limiting step, that means that since the other reactions of this pathway rely on this enzyme to work, this enzyme determines how fast the entire pathway can go. If you have a later enzyme that's really fast, but ALAS is still slow, it doesn't matter because you cannot have these other enzymes functioning without ALAS working. So that is why it is the rate-limiting step. We're going to see this in action with acute intermittent porphyria. So we have ALA then that is going to be converted by ALAD, so ALA dehydratase, to porphobilinogen or PBG. And then PBG is going to be converted by PBGD to hydroxymethylbilane. And then that's kind of where we're going to stop the pathway today. We have a few more enzymatic steps to produce heme. And then here's the thing. So we have heme, and the whole entire goal of this is to produce heme. So once we have enough heme, we go through this whole pathway, we make heme, and we don't need to make any more heme. We don't want to waste resources. So once we have enough, it's going to signal back to ALAS to stop. It's going to have negative feedback. Say, we don't need any more heme, you can stop this pathway. So then that frees up glycine and succinyl-CoA to go be used in other places. Because remember, if it's trapped in this pathway by ALAS, then it has no choice but to go through this reaction. So we need to stop ALAS from working so hard so that we can use glycine and succinyl-CoA elsewhere. But here's the problem. So when we have acute intermittent porphyria, this pathway is not going to work. Specifically, one enzyme is not going to function. We are going to get rid of PBGD. So look at this. This enzyme here is not functional. And normally, this isn't a huge problem because we have enough of everything else to make it work. And here's the interesting thing. So the problem, yes, is with PBGD. But where we really see the effects is with Alice. Because this is where we get the intermittent side of this porphyria. So if you have a type of stress, somebody who has an infection, or they might have a lot of alcohol in their system, they might be malnourished. And these are some really big ones that we would see in the vampire myths. Think about way back in those days when especially poor people did not have a lot to eat. They would have nutrient deficiencies. They might be exposed to more infections. They might have higher alcohol intake. And that can cause stress on this system. And you're going to need more heme. And so you're going to do something called induction. You're going to induce Alice to work harder. So in all these stresses, you need more heme. You need more of this pathway going. So Alice is going to work really, really hard. And so what we're going to do is we're going to trap so much of this glycine and succinyl-CoA. We're going to trap it in this system. It cannot be used anywhere else in the body. But following this, we're going to convert it to ALA. Then we're going to convert it to PBG. But hold on a sec. We cannot convert it to hydroxymethylbilane. We cannot convert it to heme. So we're trapping these. We're going to get a high amount of ALA and a very high amount of PBG because that's the only place it can go. It cannot go any farther. And then what else we get here? So we have a high amount of Alice working. We have no heme to inhibit the activity of Alice. So we're going to get more activity of Alice. We're going to get more ALA, more PBG, and no heme, so no inhibition. This is just going to be a runaway train on the track, and you can't do anything to stop it. So what happens when we get a high level of these intermediate compounds? This is a problem. So we have this buildup of ALA and PBG, which are linked to the psychological or neurologic effects in AIP. So things like hallucinations, seizures, psychosis. You might have abdominal pain. Some random abdominal pain will come of this. But you can see where something like this would cause somebody to be seen as undead or possessed. So somebody who was previously asymptomatic that now presents with a random abdominal pain, random hallucinations, paranoia, psychosis, seizures, they might be accused of being demon-possessed, of being undead, of being a vampire. And it can scare people. It scared a lot of people back in the Middle Ages, back in times when people were worried about vampires. But it's not their fault. They did not choose to have this happen to them. They were born with a deficiency in this enzyme, and then under certain periods of stress, it caused them to have this acute attack. And so this is why we need to look at the science here. This is a pathway of how you might get the neuro effects of vampirism. But something I also wanted us to consider in this video today. Does drinking blood relieve symptoms? So think about this. So heme is responsible for carrying oxygen to your tissues. If you can't make your own heme, does getting heme from somewhere else help you? Specifically, if you were to drink it, like in the vampire myths. And the data suggests, yes, it could potentially relieve the symptoms. And that might be where we get the blood drinking myths with the vampires. Because it's been shown that heme can survive in the digestive tract and it can be absorbed. So I think there might still be some debate about that. I'm not 100% confident that it is true that drinking blood would relieve symptoms, but data out there suggests that that might be the case. So I hope you enjoyed this video about AIP. Next time we're going to talk about photosensitivity and why sunlight can harm people with porphyria, and I will see you all in the next one.